Mitch Paone is the co-founder and creative director of Dia Studio, a creative agency with headquarters in Chamonix in France and in New York City, although less and less. Dia specializes in corporate and cultural visual identity systems, graphic design, and typography. Their signature use of motion and generative tools has led to collaborations with clients such as Squarespace, Balenciaga, Pinterest, Nike, Google, and many others. Additionally, Mitch is actively engaged in teaching. He taught at the Geneva University of Art and Design and the Royal Academy of Art in The Hague. He's also the co-founder and type designer of Monkey Type, a type foundry also based in Chamonix. And if all that wasn't enough, he is a performing jazz pianist and composer. In this lecture, Mitch will illustrate how his background as a musician has shaped the framework for Dia's design process, collaborations, and business model, which he developed alongside his partner, Meg Donahue. So, without further ado, please give a warm applause to our first guest, Mitch Paone.
Check, check. 1 second, I just realized I need some water. Thank you very much for that introduction, Aiden. Very, very excited to be here. I think when you sent the invite, I was like, I got a kind of crazy schedule, but I'm going to figure this out, and we did. And so here I am. And also got fair warning that it rains out of nowhere here, so I thought it would be a great idea to ride my bike on the way. Halfway here, I got completely soaked, and exactly what Aiden said not to do, so take a cab. I was like, no, it's cool. So anyway, I'll get into a lot of stuff in a very short period of time. Let's see. There we go. All right, so the title of the lecture is Time is Form, Form is Time. This has been an ongoing lecture, ongoing presentation of mine for as long as I've been doing this. And I think this intersection of movement, motion, sound, how just things are just moving, but also how that time can actually create form, and there's kind of this interaction between all of these things that come together. And a lot of this ladders up from my background as a musician and understanding how that relates to a lot of the things I do rhythmically within that, but also translates within animation, film, design, you name it. So I'm just going to get into it. Here's a lot of things that I've managed. Studio, the Type Foundry, do a lot of lectures, teaching, and different workshops. I post a lot of music stuff there, and then I drink a lot of wine. So the house shard is an inside joke. I can talk about that later. So improvisation is really, to me, this thing about creating something absolutely in the moment without thinking about what's happening after, before you're committing to that moment fully, as you see John Patitucci is as he plays the bass. You don't care what you look like, what you're thinking about. You really just engross yourself in the moment of creation. And also, you don't take yourself too seriously when you're so focused playing music, so you can stick your tongue out, make noises and grunts and things like that. So that was the Wayne Shorter quartet. That's John Patitucci on bass, Wayne Shorter on saxophone, Danilo Perez on piano, and Brian Blade on drums. This is one of my all-time favorite music groups. And I show that clip because that group, particularly just the interaction with the musicians and just exploring and pushing music so far, I think encapsulates a way of thinking about creativity and the creative process. So yes, that makes a lot of sense as a musician, because obviously you're performing and you're playing, but so how does that apply to, a design practice as well? So the thinking is, when I'm creating something, the improvisation's in the middle. Everything that happened in my life leading up to that point has put me here. and that's informed that decision, that gut feeling of what I'm doing. And then I can make something and reflect on that. We just had a quick conversation before. We don't like the things that we do right after we finish them. There's always something we need to fix. But that's that feedback of learning from the output that goes back to input, then allows you to create. So it's kind of this continual sort of connection of things. And I think it's very important that there's a split line between this before and after. So when we are creating, we're not being critical. We're not being overly, concerned about what we're doing. We're just doing, making. We're guided by the gut feeling of what feels right at the time. And I think that embodies exactly how Wayne Shorter and the rest of the band were playing at that point in time in that clip. So I'm going to talk about the input, all of this weird madness about my life in the studio and stuff, and why we do things we do. And then we're going to talk about the output and a few different projects and how that comes to life. So I come from a kind of a strange background. I was born in Kansas City. Wanted to get out of there as fast as I could when I could, so when I was 18. But I was into skateboarding, snowboarding, discovered the work of David Carson, Neville Brody, the typical stuff you would see in skate and surf magazines in like the early 90s. And then also I heard this record from Herbie Hancock, Thrust. I think I was like 15 or 16. I was like, Mom and Dad, I want to take jazz lessons, please. I want to do that. So then I was like, I got this design thing, I got this music thing. I was just like, oddly knew exactly what I wanted to do at that point. Not that I knew what I wanted to do, but like, those are the two things that I was going to explore. So the only university in the United States that would let me study music and design was Loyola University of New Orleans. Not a school that you even have to give a portfolio to. But they're like, Mitch, it's kind of impossible to study music and design at the same time. You're going to be here forever. And they were right. So I was like, design seems to be like a little more of a career that I want to take like properly, but I can cherry pick the music classes. So I just took jazz combo, jazz lessons, and worked on my piano practice and skipped all of the theory stuff. And I was like, I don't need a certificate saying that I can play music. But luckily, very luckily, at the university, the director, she just had left CalArts, super young, super excited to run a new program. Her name is Daniela Marks. Exposed me to the work of like April Greiman, Nicholas Troxler, and then also at that time, motion graphics was sort of taking off, getting familiar with the work of Cal Cooper, MK12, PSYOP, Brand New School. All these things were kind of happening at the same time. And I was like, this is cool. I got to figure this out. So as I'm sort of digging into this, I'm seeing that there's such a great graphic design vernacular within music on that side. So I'm seeing Blue Note records. If you look at the Blue Note record covers, there's definitely like a really like pumped up, happy vibe. And I like to compare the ECM. Feels like, it's a little more serious. So it's just funny how just a very simple typographic adjustment can display this aesthetic feeling out of something. And I started to kind of understand this when I was in my studies in school and started to grab into that. And then through that, my studies in music and being in New Orleans and being around other musicians really looked at the life of Wayne Shorter as kind of guru master guy. He went to his whole life continuing trying new stuff. I think he won the Grammy for the best jazz record when he was in his late 80s. And just his life of, studying Eastern philosophy and Buddhism and his practice in that also is very interesting to me too, about being in this constant state of learning. So I only put this in here because it does prove that I do play. This is randomly, I was in St. Petersburg, Russia. I was at a conference and they're like, Mitch, there's like a jam session, we're going. And I was like, okay. But I was like, we had a big night the night before. I was like, I don't know if I can make it. And then they're like, oh yeah, you're playing. And I was like, all right. So here I am playing with just a random group of musicians in St. Petersburg. We're playing Speak No Evil from Wayne Shorter, actually. And just having some good times. So anyway, there's a little bit about my background. A lot of music, a lot of understanding there. I want to give you a little taste. So from New Orleans, then kind of displaced, Hurricane Katrina hit, and went to Dallas, went to LA, worked for some motion graphics companies, and then ended up freelancing as a designer in New York between 2005, 2009. I haven't shown this piece to anybody in like 10 years, but so this is what I was up to in that period of my life. But as I see it now, it's actually kind of still part of the lineage. I was drawing custom typefaces. They were being animated within a scene. There's motion graphics involved. So I feel like there has been a direct trajectory from the work I was even doing that long ago to what we're doing today. But it's kind of funny. I think this is not even an HD. This is old. But anyway, so I had the fortune and luck to meet my wife and business partner, Meg. We were freelancing in a studio in New York, and we were in charge of new business as freelancers, which is kind of unusual, if you know what I mean. Like, okay, we're going to put you in front of clients, but you're actually not staff. So it ended up backfiring on them because we ended up quitting and leaving and taking the clients with us and starting our own company. And ironically enough, we're 50-50 business partners before we actually asked her to marry me. So the commitment was strong. But I think once we merged forces, really the studio started to take shape. So this is a picture from our office in downtown Manhattan. This is back then, and this is the office now. Also, landscapes are kind of similar but different. We like being towering over us. There's this sense of ominous, like, destruction on you all the time that kind of keeps you in your place. So I think there's actually kind of a relationship between the two. So enough about that. Let's get into the work. So the thought of identity, I was talking about music, rhythm, all this stuff. As a graphic designer, fonts, colors, layouts, grid systems, all that stuff create a specific identity. But what if it's bigger than that, What if you think of it from a sense of evolution, like the specific place in Africa that has this specific kind of weather or climate creates a zebra, which is a very specific creature. And I think, and this is even more nerdy for me, thinking about orange wine in Slovenia, very specific wine from a very specific place by specific people there. Why are they making it? But it's really good. But the thing is, it's not just about like the formal process. It's all these other conditions that are connected to it of why that comes to place at that period of time. And it's constantly evolving. And I find that kind of very interesting. So looking at my background in music, coming from motion graphics, we realize that identifying factors in work don't have to necessarily relate to the formal qualities of what we're doing. The way they move can be a way of expressing identity. So this idea of kinetic identity became kind of an encapsulating thing of looking at work, I think, really since the A-Track project that Aidan mentioned in 2016, is that the movement actually creates the form. Time is form, form is time. So if I break this down, all this stuff is natural. These are things that we see in nature. We have gravity, magnetism, all these different rules of physics that we see naturally absorbed. If we see a bouncy ball bounce or whatever, we know what that does. We know how these things behave. These things are very normal to us just because that's how we experience nature. The movement of magnetism, we understand that movement because that's something that's natural. And then looking at that from a technological standpoint, obviously there's tremendous amounts of information from trigonometry and physics that we can think about when we're getting into algorithmic stuff or writing code. So we can emulate a lot of these behaviors directly within that. So what began as kind of just an experiment, this is basically just replacing things with typography in the context of movement based on these points of references. And so these are just old experiments, magnetism plus type, gravity plus type. We're just starting, it's just like anything plus type became sort of the experimentation of what that happened. So then it just, all right, what else can we do? How far can we take this? So looking at biomechanical systems. So essentially my body has its limits based on the structure of my joints, but also like a gait. So this is Edward Muybridge. This is like one of the first, I think the first loop or piece of film. I'd probably be corrected on this after the conference. But I find this pretty fascinating from a graphic design context because within the loop, I have basically the ability to generate static images with highly dynamic features to them in an instantaneous way. So I could just pick a frame, let it be, pick a frame, let it be. And then this actually really is the essence of a generative system in a way. You're playing with variables. Here you just have a 30-second loop, and then you can pick a frame, and that ends up being the final piece. And then, again, there is that nature that we can break this down within, physics and trigonometry and develop these behaviors based on these movements. And I find sequence of things very, very, very fascinating because you see this rhythm always through. The movement is always through. And it's kind of funny because I have a friend of mine. We had a bar just down the street from us from that picture from the New York studio, and it's one of my best friends. And he goes, Mitch, I know it's you because it looks like you have a shit-eating smile on your face and you're walking. And he could see me from a mile away, just like going like this, and it's like that's Mitch because I can see his walk and he's waddling, and that's funny because that's my walk is an identifier. Before he even saw me, he could tell it was me because I was moving a specific way. So even taking that. So when we look at these natural references, there's a sense of expression and quality of movement that makes it feel a certain way. This is like an extra level of detail, just putting that in the context of this movement, then you get almost this choreographed ballet quality within the animation. So naturally, we get into more of a musical aspect of this. And I find this is where the connection between I think music, rhythm, design comes together because within music, rhythmically, the body is intrinsically related into that connection to music. For example, if we're going to listen to White Rabbit from Jefferson Airplane, I feel like I'm going to war. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're stomping, And then if we listen to Drake, kind of like 1, 2, 3, 4. So you're emphasizing, I'll stop that. You're just emphasizing those beats. It's just 1, 2, 3, 4. If I emphasize 1 and 3, I feel like I'm going to war. If I emphasize 2 and 4, I'm going to the club. So that's it. It's just my body reacting to the emphasis of time, and that is intuitive. It's not a conceptual thing. And it's interesting, we listen to a waltz, for example. You have this kind of sweeping and swaying quality, and that's just the emphasis of those beats. And it gets more interesting, if you're familiar with Radiohead. First you reel me out and then you cut the string. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3, 2, 3, 4, 5. More odd time signatures, but then this is a classic. If anybody knew that money was in 7/4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3. So it's kind of wild. And then as a musician, okay, we have this grid within a rhythmic sense, but then we can bend it. So if you listen to New Orleans music, it's not swing, it's not straight, it's somewhere in the middle. So then it gets this, I've had 3 or 4 beer feeling, you get the wobble. And that is this, if you go to New Orleans, that's the vibe. Everybody's just kind of like, yeah. And there's such a cultural relationship to that from a rhythmic standpoint. And then I'm a big Jay Dilla fan, so then it's kind of taking the New Orleans thing to another limit and offsetting the beat so you get this kind of wobble and wiggle kind of thing going on. So now I understand that, from a music theory standpoint, me just kind of augmenting where I'm emphasizing beats and rhythm, then I know how that affects the body. The same thing happens with an animation and how we can play with it there. We can do the exact same things visually with the same concepts. And I find that it's like, we always say this in graphics, making and breaking the grid, but it's technically the same in audio as well. And a perfect example, if we look at the Jabberwockies. So there's a sense of choreography in the work overall, and I'm going to get into that and how that applies back in the design process. So we looked at that MyBridge thing. I gave you a hint of this, capturing time. So the thought of a performance, if we get into that improvisational state, we're totally focused, we're totally on performing in a way. When we capture moments in time, there's always like a beautiful expression in there. And I think this play back and forth between movement and static becomes really interesting. And then, looking at different artists and designers that explore this past, this is a piece by John de Cesare, just trying to visually explore what I'm pretty sure this is a Mozart piece or something. And then, Rudolf von Laban, great example. He was a choreographer for ballet, and just trying to find a system to develop, how am I going to instruct the dancers to do this? So, looking at this from like a graphic design or a typographic exercise, this is fascinating material for me out of the context of where it lives, because I do see a system in there. And this is really, really interesting to me, just visually, even though it's not graphic design or motion graphics, but you see this like dynamic system. And even a lot of the work from William Forsythe I find really fascinating too, because it really plays with this idea of the body creating a system and form. And it goes on and on. This Capturing Time, 18 Jules Marais. This is kind of a naive take on it from a futurist, Giacomo Balla. And also, and I think for me, and I think our studio specifically, this might be why my compatibility of teaching in Switzerland didn't go so well, is that I don't like rigidity in composition. I like things that are so not rigid that you couldn't even manually create it with the process. So it only could be captured with time. That's the only way it could be made. This is one of my favorite pieces because it gives me anxiety, because you're like, when are the balls going to fall? You're like waiting. You're like, when are the balls going to fall? So you get this feeling whenever you see work like this, and I find that really fascinating. So replace with type, of course. That's pretty much the entire formula of everything we do, is like looking at that, but what happens if we augment that with the typographic point of view? And then, if anybody, obviously there's a lot of music being played here tonight, like beat making, music making, composition. If you look at creating graphic design through the lens of a producer of music, it really is me just building a sequence and piling things on to then create these compositions that have this rhythmic quality to it. And what's cool about that is that the ability of what we can do typographically is like limitless. We just keep, oh my God, we can do this stuff that's like wormy. We can do some stuff that's 3D. It can turn this way. It's just like how much stuff can we do with type, and it's endless. And I think the important thing is that underlying rhythmic quality that has this kind of choreographed feeling to it is able to connect in a musical way, or hopefully, I think, within the work. So as I go back to it, the Muybridge piece, this is a generative piece we did for a client years ago. This ended up being the poster, so it wasn't static, but it was an animated piece, but then it was actually a massive printout that was put in the store. And then this is another example. We did there was an exhibition and lecture series at the MoMA. So this is created first, then we did the motion graphics piece out of the system. So what's nice about this is this is built, then I can just change the text, change the color, have another one, change the text, change the color, but the system's going. So then basically, all of a sudden we realize the efficiency and the acceleration of speed of production just skyrockets when you have this done, because then you can just back everything out of something like this into the practical assets of an identity. And which timing of our work in our studio was kind of perfect, because if I look at the Minority Report reference, this is kind of where we are from a marketing standpoint in the US. We're here. So essentially, a lot of the things that we're doing layer up very well for these kind of very ephemeral, quick, screen-based positions for the work, which is, for me, totally fun. So on top of all that theoretical stuff of connecting the typography with the animation, with the choreography, also, how are we able to activate this within the context of where communication design is going to live was also happening in an experimentation on the side. So I can put type on a dumpster. I can do a 360-degree poster. I can make my face some sort of typographic expression. And then, so you're combining these things together, and then, I mean, it's just natural that the evolution of the technology for communication impacts how we look at design. It's been the entire history of graphic design is that. It's like what new printing techniques affected how we look at typography. This is just a continuation of what we're doing. Layla's face. She's like, why did you do this to me, you know? And then anything, you know, you can like make stuff, you know, in this dimension of graphic design. It's totally different than looking at something within a fixed format. But I think what's important about a lot of this, and I'll get into it later, is that we can't forget about all of that history that goes into it. And I'll talk about that when I discuss type. But so from there, okay, we're stuck with Maxon, Adobe, the typical software. And it's unlike music, for example, where if I go to a friend's house, it's like a music producer, he has synthesizers, beat makers, all this shit that he can do cool stuff with. But I'm like stuck with these like options. So then basically we have to make our own to do things that we can't do in the existing software. So if I look at music or like a piano, the keys came out of an organ that had its specific sound coming through pipes. Harpsichord, same set of keys, but harpsichord plucks, so it's only one volume because it's just plucking. It's not, you don't have the expression. So I'm sure some along the way I was like, I'm tired of playing this thing. Let's do something that gives me a little more expression. So the piano was invented. And then eventually we're getting now where we can have synthesizers, we can make some beats, and we can do it all on our computer and don't even need to know how to play piano to do something as impactful, as effective, or as magical from a music standpoint than the classical pieces. I used to not say that because I am a heavily trained musician, but I've heard music done by people that don't come from a music studies background that just makes me feel ways. So I totally think that all of these ways and modes of creating work, whether it's music or design, are totally viable. So that takes us to looking at that from a graphic design standpoint. So we're making our own tools to do different things. It's like, how many more things can I do with type? Let's see, let's keep going. What can I do with type now? Let's keep going. These are some experiments. We're working on some stuff with the coder. His name is Andre Bernier, and he lives in Sao Paulo. But like literally, so this is like not the next frontier. This is what we're doing now, is just a lot of the projects are looking at generative systems, using motion, using code, and developing actual software that's outside of the Adobe suite or the Maxon suite to do the work for us. An example for this is actually from 2017. We created a generative application that then people could make their own posters, and we pasted it at an exhibition in London. This is a project with Space 10. This used to be like the kind of arts lab of IKEA, and we're like, can we turn brand guidelines into an actual piece of software? And we were limited to black and white and the typeface, playing off the idea of space. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but then, you know, basically you have this design software where you can render, export GIFs, stills, posters within like seconds. And it was pretty funny, you know, everybody wants to go play with these things, but actually everybody just wants to use the preset, because then you get, oh yeah, that's cool. I need to get this done so I can pull on the preset, hit render. So we would make presets for the team to use, and then they would put stuff out in social media and use it for different marketing purposes. I'm just going to zoom through that. So here's some exports from that project. And so, yeah, I could do this in existing software, but I know if I tried to do that in After Effects or my computer would just go shut down. But this literally, like, play with a few parameters, hit render, and it's done in like, I don't know, 5-10 seconds. And so then you're like, wow, the implications of this work from a production standpoint, you can see the acceleration of what you can do and what you can create. And it's exactly what I was talking about with the piano. Like, it allows more ideas to come through when the technological barriers are dropped. And this just continues, and there's some other examples of that. And I think, for me, it's pretty important to be able to put practical text in things. You know, you see these things just repeated type, it's cool, but I think it's important to be able to develop stuff that actually like functions as a graphic design piece, even though this is like decorative, but I do think there's kind of a mixture that's important. So here's a recent project we did, SMXL. It's like, I don't know, some unknown tech thing. This is a very New York client or a very US client. We're in tech. I was like, what do you do? Just tech stuff. I was like, okay. So we're at SMXL. So I was like, okay, we don't know exactly what you do as a company, but we can play off the idea of this exponential growth of SMXL. So then we developed this system that you you could map on faces, do all this stuff, and it ended up being, you know, all the different communication pieces for the project, and you can see all the different variables that we could change. And then, so what I particularly like about this is like looking at design in a sense of behavior. So, okay, we have the practical matters, so you even see things squeezing and shaping, so how we're interacting with the design and how it moves actually is, that form is created out of that behavior itself. It's not done from like a sort of a traditional process. So yeah, so I'm gonna slow down a little bit because there's a lot of material in there, covered a lot of ground, music, generative stuff, technology, future, blah, blah. But I think there's a reason why I think a lot of our work resonates because there is an attention and thought to tradition in the work that's pretty heavy. And I think for me specifically, that has been the ongoing process of developing typefaces and drawing fonts for the last 10, 15 years, which to me is the exact opposite of creating a generative piece of software. You wake up, you work on an S, it looks good that day, you don't look at it for a couple weeks, you go back to the S, it looks like shit, then you work on it for another 2 years, still looks bad, and then it just does this over and over again, and then eventually you're like, oh, fuck it, I'm done. Let's just release the font and be out. So in 2018, we launched Monkey Type under an alias. Michel and Margot are the email addresses of the company. We recently, just the year, came public that this was us the entire time. So we've had a lot of our competing agencies license fonts from us, from Margot at Monkey Type, which is kind of funny, but I don't care anymore. I think it's fine that it's known that this foundry has actually been ours the whole time. And I think also getting it through the finish line from a website was pretty important. So we work with a design studio, Lamb and Kirsch. I don't know if Florian Lamb was the main designer out of Berlin, and then Maximilian Keppa was on the coding side of this. Developed this Foundry site, and we wanted it all on one page. You can do everything on one page. And because you know, you go to a type Foundry site, it's like, let's just like have type specimen masturbation all over it. I was like, no, let's just make it simple and just clear, not like 400 pages of like ABC, 1, 2, 3, and metrics. So if you go to this, you can do it all within one page. And that was a lot harder than we thought. We were like, oh yeah, it'll be up in 6. It took 2.5 years to get that website up. So yeah, and then realizing that there's this e-commerce part of Type Foundries that it's extremely difficult business thing to figure out of how you license stuff. So I'm just gonna quickly go through this. These are a bunch of different typefaces that I've drawn over the years, and with some help of some other people, Antonio Delisa's help, and Sebastian Carew, Michelangelo Nigra, a bunch of different designers that I collaborate to get some stuff through the finish line. Most of the stuff I get to a point and I'm like, I'm not drawing the diacritics and extending these into the characters, so then work with more serious type designers to really finish off the actual typefaces themselves. So just gonna get through fonts, more fonts. But you know, what I love about this is what's happening when I'm realizing is that we're creating our own library or vernacular for the studio in a way, where more projects we're just using directly from the library of typefaces that are being drawn with us. And the library is getting big enough that I can cover a lot of the typographic tasks within the existing library that I have. So then it's just this becomes very self-referential, and you're just using your own material. And I think part of this actually has a bit to do with me being involved in teaching in Switzerland and being there, because a lot of the designers will just like straight up draw a typeface just for one poster. And I'm like, how do you do that? That's crazy. Like just for a poster? That seems insane. But then you're like, you look at the poster and look at the work, and then you see this connection between graphic design and typography and type design specifically within the Swiss type design culture, that aesthetically those typefaces, I think, speak very well for the context of the work that we work on, visual identities and specific things. Now, there are other scenes in type design that I'm just allergic to, but they're beautifully drawn, but I would never use it. And I think there's something there that I was very inspired by. I was like, I want to learn how to do that. And what I did was bother every single person I knew that I had access to. And luckily, I had access to some incredible people, like throughout the department at ACAL, Francois Rappo, where we did 2 custom typefaces with him on different projects, and I just bothered them. I was like, hey, will you look at this stuff? What do you think? And I'm in my mid-30s, so this is like back to the Wayne Shorter stuff, learning. Hey, like, check this out. Like, he's like, aren't you working on like this Apple thing? I was like, no, I want you to look at my fonts. Like, so like, that to me is the more satisfying part of this whole endeavor, you know? It's like there's somebody here in this crowd that I want to talk to that is something that I want to know and learn and take from and continue with. And that the type design stuff has really kind of been that for me. There's a lot of fonts. I'm going to keep going. There we go. But going back to what I was saying about the tech, the future, the crazy stuff, this exercise has taught me to look at graphic design in such a micro detail level that then you start understanding, you know, compositionally, negative space, how typography works in a way that is much more based in an editorial tradition than it is, say, a motion graphics tradition. And I think that's part of the reason this fusion of a lot of the work that we do kind of has its kind of thing. And I think when you see a lot of effects or a lot of generative stuff done with typography without that sensibility, then it looks like a screensaver or something weird. So for example, then I'm talking about what I mean by self-ref. We can just like play with our fonts and do weird stuff with them, no rules. So great for marketing typefaces. It's like, what am I gonna do today? I was like, oh, I wanna learn this thing. I got one of the typefaces I wanna use. I wanna throw it in this and play with refraction or do something, you know, with variable typefaces, maybe play with the thought I'm in like the metaverse glasses. So just like, and then you get to use your own typefaces to do this. It's super fun just to explore. And it's like, there's no rules here. I have no clients. Like, it's just play for play of your own material. So let's see. So there's all of that. So that's kind of what happens in my head 24/7. I somehow manage to sleep 8 hours a night, believe it or not. And then this is the output of the studio. Turn it up a little bit. There you have it. So that was, I think, the work of the studio, maybe like the last 5 or 6 years, and I think it's kind of wild to look at that, like thinking about the team and everybody that's been involved in that. And I think one thing that I should be very transparent about is, while the studio is at the core just Meg and I, the way we've operated the studio this small is that it's like we love working with people that are very, very talented at other things that we're not comfortable in or have like a connection with. Like kind of some of the software that I was showing you, working with people or developers that are really amazing at that. And that collaboration is was how we're able to do these projects, and even at the scale. Because most people think there's like 40 people at our agency, and that's not the fact. But I think the case is just working with the right people that you enjoy working with, and obviously being very efficient helps. So I have 2 projects I want to talk about that kind of encapsulate 2 broad spectrums of the work. This is one of the few cultural projects that we've worked on. We did the Biennale Internationale du Design Graphique en France en 2021. I think that's correct. I got to work on my French. 2021. The theme was viral during the pandemic, so that was funny and complicated. So there's one thing, if you know about our work or think about our work, we like to find concepts that are extremely direct and straightforward. It doesn't take much to really explain what we're going for. So we got viral images, viral dissemination. Those are really just conceptually like, okay, these are the areas that we're going to think about. There's something humorous here, and there's something obviously, visually that we could translate that. So, and then we're thinking about, okay, typography, there's memes and things like that too. It's like, what's kind of like, who's like a meme typographer? It's like Weingart's meme typographer in a highbrow sense. So this is us in that improvisation mode. This is not designing posters per se. This is just trying to find a typographic system that then we can apply to other things. So this is just exploring, playing, and then this is where we ended up. We're like, I was like, this is it. This is right. It's just not right enough, which is perfect. And so that gave us the basis. We're playing with this caps, title case, kind of awkward scale relationship, but it had enough like awkwardness to it that it kind of hinted the meme thing. But this just gave us a framework to then explore this stuff. So then we're starting like, okay, how do we explain the meme thing? How does this work? How does this virus of image take over the images? So this becomes more of like a technological experimentation within how this is affecting, the typography, and just kind of making experiments and exploring. So we're able to license specific memes, and then we put little Easter eggs of ourselves into the identity. You can see that dance, that was really cool. Like, there I am. Yoda's in there, it's just ridiculous. So then we develop a system. This was all built within After Effects, but it's still a generative system that essentially maps these images at different scale across the typography, and it's all based on its movement. And this is just kind of a background of you're seeing how these things are composed. So you're seeing that, like, I don't have control over the specific place of the image, but you see the virus of the images taking over. So this is the logo type, which I still makes me giggle. This is like the Yoda, and this is like the avatar for all the different stuff. So you see it. But I thought what was nice about this is, like, from a distance, you're like, what the fuck is that? It's weird. But when you get close, you're like, oh, Yoda's looking at me. So this kind of play with scale, there was some humor there, I think, for us when you see the visual communication that, when you get close and actually see what the material is that we're playing with, you see it's a virus of something, but then it's actually absurd content with inside. So this is just exports. We developed a system. We're just exporting things. We have like limitless options of variations of how we can export the logo, how we could do the layouts. So, and then we created this kaleidoscopic thing on top of it that was based on the same system too, which was great because we had the viral images, but also we could swap those out with posters and other content from the Biennale and create more content with that. So you can see every single layout of the posters that you see and of the typography is different of how it, because literally we just like exported like maybe 50 of them and just be like, that one's good, that one's good, that one's good, that one's good, send print. didn't touch them after that. When the export was done, we did have to touch the logos. That was that was kind of a pain in the ass. But the rest was less annoying. They're like, oh yeah, the logo, the logo soup is a bit of a challenge. But then, yeah, even so you see the one on the right's different than this one on the left. So then there is this constant kind of movement even within the static images within the system. So really, if I were to hit pause on this at any time, I could effectively send that to print. And then this is reformatted for all these different sizes. Then we have it set up that we have different communications. So it's all, what's the beautiful thing about this is once the system's set up, it's just like almost like data entry and then export. So then you're just like boom, boom, boom. I can do render for social media. I can get a poster on it. It's like super fast at the back end. It's super slow to get there, but the speed of being able to create things becomes, I don't know, it's nice not have to worry about a lot of that keyframing and craft at the end. So then we started to explore, so we had to create an edition. So those who have been talking to this week, I am in deep fear of editorial design in books. It stresses me out. Even business cards and like letterhead stress me out because it's permanent. If I miss a comma or like something's misspelled, like the stress there. If I have a QuickTime or a software, I can just like, oh, sorry, there's a mistake in here. Here's a new QuickTime. You can just post it back up, and then you're all good. But when it's real, it's for life. So luckily, I don't have to deal with that, unlike a few other designers here where that's their true embodiment of what they think with work. And we work with a designer, Jillian Cashin from Zurich, to adapt the visual identity in the same style and essence. So these are just some initial sketches of the index. And this is, I think, my favorite part of this project because what she was able to do typographically within a very functional standpoint is still create that sense of unease and movement within the actual text itself. And then if I should have the book with me, if I run the book on the side, you actually see all the captions on the right and left move in motion as well within that. She developed a script so then they could track differently in each layout. This is when it really comes in handy to have friends with like Swiss book designers. And I actually met her. She worked out of our studio in New York years ago and became good friends. So then here's some of the communication. And if anybody's been to Chaumont, it's a really weird town. It's like in the middle of nowhere in like the northeast of France. And like, I'm not kidding. Like when we drove out of the Biennale, like there was like a drunk old guy with a machete, like running down the street. And Meg and I were like, it's time to go. I think they're pissed off because there's weird posters all over there. There's hipsters and posters all over their town once every 2 years. And then it goes back into like pastis and low-key French lifestyle. But it's just like funny, even in like the French environment, seeing this like crazy poster against this architecture. I don't know. I still get a kick out of this project. So a lot of communication, a lot of stuff, stickers, books, everything. This is the final book here. Some of the spreads. So let's get really corporate now. In a similar sense, so we did the visual identity and branding for Squarespace in 2018. Kind of been ongoing since then, but it's pretty much done. But there's things here and there. It's also one of those things that I'm quite pleased about because most of like the corporate American branding projects like change every 2 years. And this is 6 years going on 7, and it's still maintaining the system that was developed then. And I joke with these people that are all into these award shows and stuff, and I don't, really not my cup of tea. And I was like, you can't give like a branding award to a new project. I was like, it has to at least live for 5 years for it to even have any value. And I was like, this is ridiculous. So luckily this made it past my 5-year mark. But I'm gonna get into it. So as a little tip, in American corporate design world, the best way to get things sold through is just make little films and get people pumped up. So this is the strategy of the entire project summed up within like 20 seconds. You can pump the music up if you want. there you have it. Square space. and that, but it was kind of an absurd discovery when we were playing with it. But I think when we unlocked that, we're like, holy shit, we can do a lot of crazy stuff. Before I get into the formal aspects of this, we had all, in pretty standard corporate design fashion. You have stakeholders and executive people you talk to, and so you create the strategy. But we were really lucky on this project. It was Anthony Castellana is the CEO, the chief creative officer is David Lee, and then another creative director is Nessim Higson. Those are the only three people that we interface with during, I think, 90% of the project before it went to the rest of the team. So it was Meg, myself, at this point, Daniel Wenzel was working with us, and it was the six of us essentially just covertly doing a secret project for a year and a half. And that never happens. And I think in my career, I will never have a project like this because all the other big corporate clients we've towers of marketing people and stuff. You don't have access to the CEO. Funny enough, picture of the dog at the beginning, Squarespace's original office was literally our neighbor in Manhattan, in Center Street at the time. So there was like a connection because, Anthony, who's the CEO, is like a multi-billionaire, and I was like essentially my age too, so it was like weird. It's like, oh my God, you're like billionaire CEO, but we were like walking our dog down the street. It's like, this is weird New York things. But anyway, so New York modernism, to me, is like well-funded modernism, really like a lot of finance money going into it. You got the MoMA, you got the Seagram building and things like that. And also the Vignelli system typographically is pretty iconic in a sense. So those are two pieces that we wanted to really kind of take away from that, because before they were using Gotham and some other stuff, they really didn't have much of a visual system at all. And then if you were to go to the closet of any of the design team of Squarespace, this is what you would find. Gray, you'd agree with the gray area, and the black area, and the white area. They don't wear any color in there, and it's all like, high-end. This is exactly the vibe you get when you go into the office, and I'm not kidding. This is the lobby. So I'm like, okay, you guys already have your brand like positioning figured out. You guys are like the cool New York tech company. You guys aren't like the everybody is nice to everybody, but we're going to screw you over California version. So that essentially already explained in their architecture. I was like, it's already here. So this is when we first worked with Francois. We're like, well, the key is we need to create a typeface that has all of that same feeling encapsulated directly within the form of the letters. And I was like, there's only one person on earth that can do this, and he lives in this house in the mountains in Switzerland. So by himself. So this is, I don't know if anybody knows Edward Sartoris. He's a futurist / modernist architect. He is there's a couple of his buildings in Switzerland and in Italy. So he, as a typeface designer, revives typefaces. He revived this house to its original condition. So it's actually a cultural label in Switzerland now, but he lives there. So it's to the spec of it was in the 30s. So I haven't visited yet, even though he's only 45 minutes away from me in Chamonix. But the people that go there are like, dude, it's like designed for somebody in the 30s. It's not comfortable. Everything's like tiny and like, but it's interesting. But Francois, his ability to translate this kind of modernist aesthetic and his attention to detail within the drawing, is incredible to me. And this is the first draft of the typeface. So we're looking at Accidens, Helvetica, obviously looking at the references of the Vignelli system that's kind of like a blend of the two done incorrectly, but also looking like how do we make it more fashion forward? Is there a tech quality to it? Are we going to open up the proportions in a specific way? And then also looking at the functionality of the typeface. So, we have to use UI, we have to do all these different things with it. So it has to be technically done to work in all these different use cases. Second round, I'm looking at it, I'm like, I can't even tell the difference between these. But I was like, basically it's done. And so I have to figure out a way to sell this through to the client, which I can tell you, actually, yeah, we can have a conversation about that after. Because there's these pictures you see of like branding case studies where they're like looking under microscopes and doing all the red marking on the fonts, and clients think that that's what they get to do to typefaces, and that's not actually the reality. That's actually just other type designers working together. That's not, like, I was like, David, Ness, you never drawn a font in your life. Like, what are you gonna know about like the proportions of the H? So anyway, got through that hurdle. Once the typeface is done for me, the rest of the work is pretty much, I think, easy from there, because the aesthetic of the typeface is gonna be used in all this different collateral, and it's gonna essentially take on the majority of the look and feel of the branding, even in the most expressive or the minimal case studies. So then we started playing with square and space before we found this thing, and this opened up a world of possibilities. So this is just in improvisation mode, exploring, playing, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Shared this with the team. They're like, I don't really know what this is, but it's cool, let's keep going. And then just kept going. And then eventually got more practical. Then we developed specific behaviors that then we could apply the actual design to. Here are the initial cuts. It's expanded since then. Created one for UI, a light and medium cut. You can do so much with just a very few amount of weights. And then this is the brand launch. Let's see, how am I in time? Good. So then that translates to everything. We had to look at all these different assets. How is this square and space going to be interactive? How is the typography going to work in expressive cases? When we launched the brand, these were huge posters within the lobby. Very expensive furniture in there that I can't afford. But it was just fun. Once we have that system sorted, it's just like, again, just generating these assets, just like the viral project or a lot of the other stuff that we shared with you. This is the initial toolkit for the social media stuff. So it's, you can upload a piece of image, you can just change the text, but then you already have these systems that can just generate the output for you. And this is what I'm talking about, the typeface itself, in the context of the UI, within more of the product side. The way it feels, like there's a texture to it that just feels super nice. And I think this is a lot of oversight I think people have when they're dealing with branding projects, is like, what's it going to feel like in kind of the most mundane setting? And then we created a set of tools and back and forth with the Squarespace team to help generate a lot of the work, so then they can activate this stuff within their platform. Then they went public on the New York Stock Exchange. I think this is really funny because this is Anthony giving a lecture or giving a talk on like CNBC, which is like the finance news. And I'm like, that's some crazy stuff going on the screen. And then the Stock Exchange, I was like, that won't happen again. And then they had a big media buy across New York, and I was like, this is insane as a graphic designer to see thrash type on like 1,000-foot screens and stuff. So this was definitely one of those moments in your career, like somehow we like stuck our ground and maintained a quality of work all the way to the finish line, and were able to produce it at scale. And that project really was, I think, a lot of people speculated, oh, a lot of the stuff you did A-Track, it's trendy, it's cool, whatever. But the Squarespace project really solidified that the way that we were working and the way we were thinking about work was viable and was going to be a way that we looked at brands from here on out. And now I look at work, it's natural. Most stuff is motion, most stuff is moving. Thinking about work like this is just normal. So I'm going to kind of try to wrap this up. I got a few more minutes left. Connect identity concepts that relate to the passage of time, visual systems that are created or amplified by the means of animation behaviors or computation. This is how I was taught. You make a poster, maybe make it animated, maybe you interact. I think you just got to come at it from any angle. You can do some memes, you can do some generative thing, you can do some dance, you can see like a giraffe walking and map type on it. Like, it's crazy, like how many ways in creatively that we have to come at a problem. And then when you see that interconnectivity, just like the orange wine or like the zebra, like then it opens up all these possibilities of what you could potentially do. So I've been really into my connoisseurship of fromage and cheese in the last 6 years. My weight has been fluctuating because of the habit. So I moved, because of this, there was a lot of interest in the work to being brought into the academic context. And I joked earlier, because I did a lot of teaching in Switzerland I did at ACAL, at HED, at Zahatica, I did Le Chaux de Fonds, I did pretty much covered the landscape. I think HSLU is the only school I haven't really visited. And as you've noticed, the work is not the grid. And so it was kind of funny and a funny place to try to bring that within the context of the curriculum and within that academic environment. But I will tell you, if an opportunity comes, so we moved from New York to Switzerland, this is how they bait you. So ACAL is like, you come for a residency. And I'm like, artist residency. Like, cool. I was like, okay, whatever. He was like, look at the pictures. And I was like, okay. I was like, when do you need to know? Meg, what do you think? We need to know by Friday. We had 4 days. I was like, let's fucking go. Like, shut the studio down and move. So this was our office for the Lebec. It's called Lebec. It's the artist residency in La Tour de Paix. So what's really weird about this is Shania Twain is the neighbor on this side. And then the CEO of Nestle is on this side. And then we were kind of like the commercial kids on the block. And then you have some really experimental art stuff happening. So we would be like sitting there working on some stuff, and like some crazy shit would be happening in the front. And then like Shania Twain would call the cops because we were being too loud. I'm not kidding. This is true story. But anyway.
So for me it sounds like, and movement would be like.
So I started doing this. This is an exercise that I do in class. So we're connecting movement, form, and sound. So if I draw a picture, what does it sound like? How does it move? And you have to immediately perform. There's no thought. It's like, go. So then it has to be like an intuitive response. So I could make a noise, and how does it look? I could dance, and how does that sound? So then there becomes a development of language between these three things. And this became really kind of the core exercise to develop the workshops. Here's just some examples of me screwing around with students and having fun with crazy stuff over the years. As you can see, it's funny because things are uptight when you start, and then by the end, everybody's just like best friends, dancing around in class, having a blast, trashing the place. This is also funny. So in ACAL, if you do a workshop there, I always laugh because the last day, it takes like the whole day for everybody to perfectly line up the posters. They're all on like the ladders, like I was like, we're not doing that. I was like, we're working on Friday. We're gonna keep pushing this. The work isn't ready to be presented. And then I was like, do we have any like screens in here somewhere? And they're like, oh yeah, I think we have some screens in the back. And I was working with assistant Elliot Grunwald, great type designer. It's like, yeah, we got some screens. He's like, but they got like orange cords. I was like, that's rad. It's cool. Let's just throw them on the floor in the entry, and that's it. And then people came out and they're like, this is the most considered exhibition. And I'm like, this is improvised at the moment, but then it was a really cool way to actually interact with the specimens and then teach the students different ways to bring their typefaces to life. This is input-output processes in the head media design, thinking about looking at a way of creating some sort of input to then generate the output. Basically a lot of how our work was built, but it wasn't necessarily in a graphic design context, but looking at finding information or data or something that can be applied and then taken out of context in a different way. And then finally, this is, I think, my favorite workshop, where we took that form, movement, sound thing to a whole different level, where each of these groups had to develop their own language, that they had to create a performance at the end of the week. So then they could actually communicate with themselves using symbols or using sound or using movement. And then, I was making them do like walking meditation and sit. It was crazy. Like everybody in the school was like, what is Mitch doing to the student body at HED? And I had them in like circles, and it was kind of like hippie, totally not typical in there, but it was just super fun and one of the most rewarding, I think, experiences for me to see how they actually kind of took this on. This is just the little bits and bobs of
people that work through emotions. We start at the center and
it's live. So someone cues it. So like, here's a word or a sound, and then they react in time. This is all improvised on the spot. And you can hear the violin follow the pen here. And then she's trying to paint the emotion on her face with makeup. Like this is, I was so excited to see how this was kind of translated within something, and it blew my mind. And that was my last bit of formal teaching at Head too, so it was a good send off. So I'm going to wrap this up. I have a few more minutes. So this is a quote from Sunru Suzuki: "The beginner's mind is there many possibilities, but expert there are few." And this goes back into Wayne Shorter. It's like always being in that state of learning. This is a quote from my piano teacher when I was 16. It's not a mistake if you play with conviction. And it's true, as a musician or if I'm playing, if I react and I do something that was maybe wrong, but it's how I deal with that. Is it going to make it wrong in the context? But actually, I could make a mistake and come out of it and actually be something more interesting. And if you do it with conviction and don't display the fact that it disrupted your flow, then it wasn't a mistake at all. And then maybe cheesy, but I really do like this because I think a lot of the work that we've done over the years was confusing and new or different, and I think we felt so grounded in the love of exploring typography and motion and how it related to music that we didn't really care. So eventually, while you're dealing with sort of a resistance, eventually it kind of took off in a way. And I think Wayne sort of says it all enough. And I think with thinking about improvisation, not thinking of being in time, you're not being critical, you're not comparing, you're not expecting, you're not fear, you're not being self-conscious. You lose yourself in that moment, just like the students were doing that in that workshop. So to finish, I'm going to let these two gab about the creative process.
Well,
get
actually,
out of your hair.
The intent now is to throw away and kind of put away everything that was learned, the studied stuff. Again, I always refer, because Miles is the only one that would talk like this. He'd say, Wayne, he said, hey, Wayne, do you ever feel like you want to play, he said, you want to play like you don't know how to play? And then he said, do you feel like you'd like to play music that doesn't sound like music? That doesn't sound, I know it's familiar, and I have a tape of Charlie Parker giving a lesson, and the student says, Mr. Parker, I have to learn all these scales, memorize all these scales? And Bird said, yes, and after you finish learning them, forget them.
Right, play as if you don't know all of that stuff, or you're not playing a scale, but you're playing straight from the heart.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So, while we wait for our next guest to get mic'd up, I think we can squeeze in one question from the audience. So if anybody has something to ask, please raise your hand. Now bring the mic. Improvise, don't be scared.
Put him on the spot.
First of all, I really like your music taste. I gotta say that.
Thank you.
But otherwise, do you think when you made these interfaces for your identity clients, do you think we will also have programs like Adobe or stuff in the future that will allow us to do that in a more simple way than code?
I would hope so. I mean, I think for those companies to stay competitive within the landscape, they need to evolve and be able to, allow sort of the ability to create that stuff. As of now, it's not happening. I can't even animate variable fonts in After Effects. So but it seems like there's a big area for developers and designers to then create new tools, new softwares to completely disrupt the industry, I think. So We're seeing that Cavalry is a good example. If you look at that, there's an animation software that's really great. I mean, Cinema 4D, the Houdini, there's all these other things that you can do stuff with. But yeah, I mean, that's the direction I think things should be going.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else?
Yeah, one more?
One more.
Well, then
All right.
Okay.
Hi, thanks for the talk. It was really nice.
Thank you.
I was wondering, when you do the different brand identities and you're figuring out the system, like, do you kind of think of the personalities that you create so that they don't repeat in other brands, or is there patterns that should repeat with every brand? How do you decide what's the personality?
There's usually a strategic component. I mean, Squarespace is pretty straightforward, and I think the aesthetic of the project has to encompass sort of an atmosphere that the company wants to put out there. So in essence, if we're developing a visual identity, particularly a branding job, we're looking at the landscape to make sure there is a space for it that does feel different. Now, that being said, it often happens that within 6 months or a year, then that can turn into a trend or becomes kind of, in vogue, I guess. But I think it's very important to establish like that strategic aesthetic lane. It's like, why did we work with Francois on the font? Because it's like modernism and his thing. And that there's a reason why those creative decisions were made. And if you look at, I would say the most of our work, it's tricky because we aren't really a branding firm per se, but we do a lot of branding jobs. They are different, but I still think there's still a common thread between what we do, because I think the interest in typography is always consistent. Yeah, we try to make sure it's unique to each project. But cool.
Cool. Thank you very much.
All right.
Mitch is also still with us in-house, so after all the other events, you can still approach and ask some more stuff. So thank you very much for coming.
Yes. Thank you.